we have our dear co-host, co-chair of the event, Katrín Jakobsdóttir. She is the Prime Minister of Iceland. Give her a round of applause. We also have with us Kristrún Frostadóttir, member of Althingi, leader of the Social Democratic Alliance. And then Áslaug Arna Sigurbjörnsdóttir, Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation. And last but not least, Þorbjörg Sigríður Gunnlaugsdóttir, Member of Parliament. And as I said earlier, they are all from different parties, and give her a round of applause. But I would like to start, Prime Minister. You are the first Prime Minister and the only Prime Minister in the world that made the decision when you took power to take gender equality and put that under your portfolio, in your ministry. Why was that done? How has it worked? And is this an indication of the focus that you and your government and whole Parliament place on gender equality?
Well, absolutely. I think placing the gender equality portfolio in the Prime Minister's office makes it actually possible to implement gender equality in everything we're doing. Our priorities actually harmonize very well with what you have been talking about here, equal pay and ending gender-based violence. We are so lucky here in Iceland to have had, we have had women politicians and women activists, not for years, but for decades, that, for example, fought for equal paternal leave back in the day, something that I think is absolutely vital to retain, because this has really made a difference for gender equality in Iceland. Another issue I might mention of women who came before all of us is universal childcare and early education for all children, which is also a structural change which has actually been a key to our success in gender equality. But equal pay and ending gender-based violence is something that really connects to everything we are doing. So I think placing this in the portfolio of gender equality in the Prime Minister's office has actually made it easier to do things more quickly.
Exactly.
Thank you, Kristrún. My question is really to ask you, because you are, across the parties, and we know across the world right now there's a whole lot of polarization and a tendency to pull apart. Yeah. How have you maintained the consensus that gender equality is absolutely critical and central to Iceland?
This is a very big question. I think it's important to realize, as Katrín just mentioned, that we have maybe in a larger respect a longer tradition when it comes to gender equality. My party, for example, is based in large part of women that came from the women's list, which was a huge movement here. They did disperse to other parties as well, that being said, but that has very much affected our politics, but it has also affected the entire political sphere. Before they came into parliament, city council, numbers of women in these places were very low, and we had a gigantic leap just by this political movement that came forth that put this on the agenda. So I think this has definitely affected the entire political sphere. This was took a long time coming, but raised leaders that were role models for someone like myself. I have also talked about people that come before Katrín, like Sigurðardóttir, which was our first female prime minister and came from the Social Democratic Alliance. But it's also important, for young women like me to have someone like Katrín who's leading the country, because even though there are certain things we might disagree on a daily basis, it's very important to have role models. And I see mostly our role is in this respect to try to have the focus on gender equality as something that's apolitical, that we can be role models. I myself am a young mother. I had a baby 9 months ago. I have a 4-year-old. I ran for chair of the party when I was 6 months pregnant. And nobody asked me questions about this. And you feel a lot of support from the women around us. So I think, this is something that we take as a given, but we have to strive for every day. But it's important to have these role models, and I definitely think it affects the way people see gender politics in Iceland.
Great.
Thanks so much, Kristrún. Talking about young women, Áslaug, Arna, you are the youngest that we've had a female minister. So that's another factor. It's not just being a woman, it's also that, I hope I'm not stressing something that, I mean, it's obvious you're fairly young, and you were, you were only 28 when you started in government. How has that been? Share the experience.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was appointed at the age of 28 to become the Minister of Justice. I decided when there was an empty seat in the government to fight as hard for it as the male figures in my party. And when my chairman, the foreign minister, appointed me in the seat, he got an email that stood like, "Are you changing the government into a kindergarten?" But to gain respect as a young woman, it's of course your action. Of course, I live in Iceland, and it's privileged, like they have mentioned, how far we've come, and we are really grateful for that. But still, we have something left. And you need to fight for respect as a young politician and a young female, because I still believe we are a little bit on that note that we admire female politicians, but sometimes you always think they are too young or too old, not enough experienced or outdated, too single or too much with your family. So it's always not right. So I really believe, though, that your actions, and when people see how important it is to have a variation of a group, for example, in the government, not only we have now more female ministers than male, but also in the age gap. And I feel like decisions I made and bills I came through as a Minister of Justice, for example, with digital violence, to put that in a criminal act, that wouldn't maybe be at the forefront of someone that would be much older than me.
Right. It's really interesting. I come from Ghana originally, and that we would say after that kindergarten comment, you know, nowhere cool. I mean, really, because you'd have thought that Iceland would have been beyond that. Þorbjörg, please, Iceland is measured on various indexes at the top of gender equality, with the highest percentage of women in leadership. But there's still a little gap. What do you see as the most important things that Iceland is doing to close that gap finally?
I would definitely see it as one of our biggest threats here in Iceland. The discussion about we have already reached gender equality. You hear this a lot now. Some even suggesting that we have, like there could be too much equality. So I would say we should continue our history. We should continue the legacy of, for instance, all political parties taking themselves seriously, taking gender equality seriously, with equal pay and gender-based violence. I think because how successful we have been, it's very important to not forget the roots. Yeah. You can't be successful with gender equality if you don't tackle gender-based violence. This I say as a former prosecutor specialized in sexual offenses. You can't discuss quotas regarding how many women you want to have on boards in companies if you don't tackle this issue. It's all related. But regarding the discussion of, and I think they all agree, we hear it, that we should be proud. We've almost had enough, because compared to other countries, things are good here, but they are relatively good. We haven't reached the goal. I sometimes think about a quote I heard from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said the key to every good marriage was to have wax earplugs. So when I hear this discussion about we should tone it down a bit, drop it, we have already almost reached gender equality, use the wax earplugs.
Excellent.
Thanks so much. And back to our Prime Minister. As we mentioned earlier, Katrín is the co-chair of the event. And in the discussion we had pre-event, Katrín placed a lot of importance on making sure that we would look at cases and countries or a block of countries that could actually show success. So we wouldn't just be telling you, which will be later today, I'm not going to sort of tell you about the results, they will be known then, but we are not seeing a really good turnout when it comes to the perception we would like of women leaders. But Iceland has always ranked way higher than other countries on this. So the Prime Minister said to me, let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's see if it's not just Iceland, let's see if there is some model of not just one island far away from everything, where the perception is actually different. So we did a research, Katrín, as you wanted, on the Nordic countries to see if there is a Nordic model or if there is something that we can look to and say, this seems to work better than other things. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's very interesting to look at the results from this research because I mentioned the structural changes that we have made, and you can see actually that these structural changes when it comes to early education and shared parental leave, the Nordic countries share a lot of similarities when it comes to structural changes just in the welfare society, and we see that those structural changes work. That is really what I conclude from the research, where all the Nordics are doing pretty well. All the Nordics actually show that gender equality is somehow becoming more normal. But still, I must remind us all that we can't take anything for a given. And as Þorbjörg said, we heard that before the women's strike, which was only a few weeks ago. Why should there be a strike? Aren't we nearly there? Isn't it enough? And a lot of people said to me, why are you as a prime minister joining the strike? Aren't you a politician and should you not just be in your office? And I said, gender equality in Iceland is about politics. And we are working on politics every day to ensure more gender equality. But it's also about activism. Yep. And I think that is the reason why we are doing well, because we have all been part of that activism. Women from different parties have shown up. There were 100,000 people downtown Reykjavik on one day fighting for gender equality, even though we're the most gender equal country in the world. And I think, this shows something. So we need structural change, but we also need to keep that fire burning, because we're seeing around the world abortion rights being taken from women. We're seeing gender-based violence that is not tackled. So this is the SDG that we are furthest away from attaining. So we have to keep the fire alive.
Right.
Thanks.
And I think when you talk, Prime Minister, about some of these structural issues, it's going to be a big topic next year at UN Commission on Status of Women, where we're going to be talking about financing and investment in some of these changes that we want to see. But again, Kristrún, what are the things that you think, okay, if I were Prime Minister, this is what I would be thinking about doing next?
I think financing, yes, is a big part of this, because it's very easy to agree on where we want to go, but people disagree on the means. A lot of the time, politics is like that, especially if you don't have an overly polarized political system, which I thank God we don't have to a big degree in Iceland. But there are certain things that do cost money. And when we talk about equality and equal pay, we have to take into consideration, for example, that you might have equal pay or more equal pay for the same job, but in Iceland, the issue is still the case that for women's jobs, or jobs that women predominantly occupy, wages are a lot lower. And these are jobs that predominantly before were worked in the household by women for no wage whatsoever. We went from that type of economy to a different one a few decades ago when we decided to pay for these jobs, which allowed massive amounts of women to go into the job market, raise our GDP, raise our productivity, so we could keep growing and have a welfare state. But I think we've forgotten along the way, that some of the issues that we're now confronting when it comes to equality, for example, that women are carrying a full-time job, but also having issues with childcare. This is sometimes the issue in Iceland. They're also having issues with taking care of the elderly because they don't get space or healthcare or services for their loved ones. They're doing this alongside a full-time job now. And then we have to wonder, okay, how do we staff these jobs better? How do we provide the childcare, the health services, services for the elderly? And pay is a big part of that. And that costs money. It means you have to sort of reformalize or change the way you structure funding. And public service jobs are one of the biggest employers of women when it comes to healthcare and childcare. So it's not enough just to stand here and say we want change. Politicians can actually make these changes in the budget. And I don't want to over-politicize this discussion, but I'm just saying this is one of the things people disagree on. So definitely something that we're pushing for.
The endless discussion about where we place our money. But as our Prime Minister pointed out, all of these women that you're seeing now as the spokespersons for our government and parliament, before they entered politics, they were active in fighting for the rights of women and girls in Iceland. So this is sort of in our blood, the activism around this. And this is why I wanted to ask you, Áslaug, and to put it into context, when we say 100,000 mostly women were here outside of this hall 3 weeks ago. Let's think about that in the context of this being a city of 180,000 people. So you can imagine the amount of people and the power and the message that was sent. And this is me then asking you, Áslaug, did you take part in the strike?
I was not in Iceland, unfortunately. I would have loved to, but I prioritized my family this day abroad, but I don't do often.
Yeah. We wanted to point out that the female members of government and, of course, the members of parliament also took the day off in support. And I know that Áslaug wasn't here, but you've been before at places where we are protesting around this. Why do you think it's so sort of in our culture to do this? I mean, what is it with us that endlessly takes us to these gatherings where we're saying we need more?
I think it is the Icelandic mindset that has played a big role in our success. Women that have been fighting before us and the shoulders we stand on today are women that are like never satisfied or where we are. And we are still there. And I think that mindset will bring us to the end, hopefully one day. I mean, I sometimes see gender equality and this fight as a marathon. It's a longer marathon than we thought it would be, but we are leading the marathon, but we are not there. So if we stop, everybody else will maybe slow down a little bit if we slow down, but if we move forward, all of the other countries will hopefully move forward with us.
Yeah, excellent.
So we are not there yet, so I think that mindset of ours, that it isn't good enough, is really important, and that have made us both where we are and let us keep fighting.
Exactly.
Hanna,
final question, right?
Yeah, I thought you were going to just point out that 100,000 people was like 25% of the total population of Iceland out there the other day. So that deserves a round of applause. Like, come on. So, last question to Þorbjörg. You know, international research and data tells us that at the moment we will take about 300 years to reach gender equality, with the largest single gap being in political equality. Do you know how close you all are in terms of time? I think you've set yourselves a target for gender equality here.
Well, I do know that it wasn't time that put Iceland in its place regarding gender equality. It wasn't waiting for the right time. It was action. It was policy, it was legislation, it was the women's movement. So I think, you know, I don't want to start by getting us all depressed by saying I think it's 180 years. So I think the answer is to continue. And for us as members of parliament and ministers to remember that, you know, views, they impact policy and legislation. Legislation and budget also impacts views. It's a circle. We can be the change. And it's important to have the guts to take the steps. I remember when my party was in government and we put forward the equal pay certification, then one of the answers was, this won't have an impact on, like Kristrún said, the jobs that the majority of women. No, it won't, but this is another important step. And this signals that we are continuing, that we're not stopping. For us to reach the final point, I agree with Kristrún in terms that we need to tackle the jobs that women are in the majority of doing. And there's something fundamentally wrong with how we as a society value those jobs. That and the gender-based violence, I think, will be the key.
Thank you so much. And this closes our first panel of the day. I would again like to thank these great women leaders. Thanks for co-hosting the Reykjavík Global Forum. Thanks for making sure that you speak. I know there are, of course, differences in opinion, but we have people, as I said earlier, and I think this is also the key to gender equality success in Iceland, that there is a political consensus around this being one of our most important issues of today. So thanks for being on the watch every day around that, and good luck in your days ahead. We know they will be challenging, but best of luck for that, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.